I opened my eyes, and the first thing I saw was a stranger's face twisted into a cruel smirk, his eyes cold and merciless. He was standing right in my bedroom in my house, as if he owned the place. Behind him were two other men, looming like shadows, ready for anything. My wrists were bound tightly, the rope cutting into my skin as I struggled against it, but it was no use. They had me completely under their control. "Finally awake, huh?" the man sneered, leaning down so close I could feel his breath. "You must be the cuckold." The word hit like a slap, each syllable dripping with mockery. My jaw clenched, a mix of rage and humiliation boiling inside me, but I couldn't move, couldn't even give him the satisfaction of a glare. My mind scrambled, trying to piece together what was happening. Who were these guys, and why were they in my bedroom? How the hell had they gotten in? Then, as I scanned the room, my heart twisted in my chest. There, standing by the door with her arms crossed, was my wife, Sarah. Her face was stone cold, her eyes lacking the warmth I thought I knew. No guilt, no shame, just a dark satisfaction that sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd shared years with, was just watching, as if this was something she'd been waiting for. "Sarah?" I managed to choke out, my voice hoarse with confusion and betrayal. Her gaze flicked to me, and she shrugged, as if I were an inconvenience, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. The stranger smirked wider at my reaction, clearly enjoying every second of this twisted display. "Poor guy," he said, patting my face in a mock gesture of sympathy. "Look at him, still trying to figure it out. I'll make it easy for you, cuckold." He laughed, the sound cold and mocking. "Your wife? She's mine now." The words hung in the air, filling the room with a kind of horror I'd never known. Every fiber of my being wanted to lunge at him, to wipe that smirk off his face, but the ropes held me tight, binding me to this nightmare. I glanced back at Sarah, hoping for some sign that this was a mistake, that there was something I was missing. But her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked almost amused, as if watching me suffer was the real entertainment here. "See, your wife," the stranger continued. "She got tired of waiting around for a boring, predictable guy like you. She wanted something more." He leaned in close again, his voice dropping to a mocking whisper. "Someone who knows how to make her feel alive." The rage building inside me was like a fire I couldn't put out. I fought against the ropes again, feeling the burn against my wrists, but it didn't matter. They had me helpless, forced to listen to this stranger flaunt his control over the woman I'd thought was mine. I wanted to scream, to break free, to make him regret every word, but I couldn't do a thing. As if he could read my thoughts, the man laughed again, standing back up to his full height and looking down at me with a mix of contempt and amusement. "Oh, I know what you're thinking," he said, smirking. "You think you're going to get out of this somehow, that you're going to take a swing at me and everything will be fine. But let me tell you something." He nodded to his two goons, who moved forward, one of them grabbing me by the shoulders and shoving me hard against the floor. The other knelt down beside me, his fist colliding with my stomach in a punch that sent pain shooting through my entire body. I gasped, trying to catch my breath, but they didn't give me a chance to recover. Another punch, this one to my side, left me gasping for air, pain blurring my vision. "Listen, cuckold," the man said, his voice low and deadly serious. "If your life means anything to you, you'd better accept the situation and stay out of my way. Your wife is mine now, and I like it that way." The room spun as I struggled to process his words, the pain making it hard to think straight. I looked back at Sarah, hoping, somehow, that this would jolt something in her, that she'd realize how far things had gone. But she just stood there, unmoved, her eyes cold and distant. It was like looking at a stranger wearing my wife's face. I managed to whisper, "Why, Sarah?" The question came out weak, almost a plea, but I couldn't help it. I needed to understand, to know why she would do this. She shrugged again, an infuriatingly casual gesture. "Because you were never enough," she said, her voice flat. "You were too predictable, too safe. I wanted excitement, something real. And, well," she glanced at the man, a small, satisfied smile on her lips. I found it. My heart shattered, the pain cutting deeper than any blow. All those years, all the trust, the love I'd believed we shared, it was nothing to her. Just a phase, something she'd outgrown. And now, here I was, tied up in my own bedroom, being humiliated by a man who'd taken everything from me. The stranger looked at his watch and grinned. "Tell you what," he said, almost cheerful. "We're going to give you a head start. 1 hour. Then we're coming for you." His grin widened as he added, "And whoever finds you first, well, let's just say they'll get to enjoy the real prize." With a final smirk, he turned and walked out, his goons following behind. Sarah lingered for a moment, her gaze flicking over me one last time, a hint of satisfaction in her eyes before she, too, disappeared down the hall, leaving me alone with nothing but the sound of the doors slamming shut behind them. As soon as the doors slammed shut, the silence in the room was almost deafening. I lay there, my heart pounding, my wrists burning from the ropes digging into my skin. 1 hour. That's all the time they were giving me. A measly 60 minutes to escape before they came hunting for me like some kind of twisted game. My mind was a mess of rage, betrayal, and raw, desperate survival instinct. I pulled against the ropes, but they were tied too tight. Every twist and pull just made them cut deeper into my wrists. My military training kicked in, urging me to stay calm, to focus, to find a way out. Panicking would get me nowhere. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my mind, and glanced around the room, scanning for anything that could help me. My eyes landed on a shard of glass near the bed, probably from the picture frame they'd knocked over in their little show of force. I shifted my body, inching closer, my hands straining as I reached out with bound wrists, stretching as far as I could. The rope bit into my skin, but I kept pushing, my fingertips finally brushing against the edge of the glass. Gritting my teeth, I managed to grab it, positioning it in my hand and carefully sawing at the rope, moving slowly to avoid slicing my own skin. It felt like hours, each second ticking by like a bomb waiting to go off, but finally, the rope loosened. I yanked my wrists free, gasping in relief as I rubbed at the red marks left behind. I didn't have much time, and I couldn't afford to waste a single second. I jumped to my feet, my mind racing as I considered my options. Running out the front door was out of the question. They'd be watching, waiting. I needed to be smart, unpredictable, to use every ounce of training I had. I moved silently through the house, slipping down the hallway to the back door. My car keys were on the counter, but taking the car would be too obvious. They'd expect me to drive, and they'd catch up to me in minutes. I needed another way. Then, I remembered the old forest trail behind the house, the one I used to run for exercise, where I could hide, navigate the dense woods, and stay out of sight. I slipped out the back door, adrenaline surging through my veins as I sprinted toward the tree line. The cool night air bit into my skin, the ground uneven beneath my feet as I plunged into the darkness of the forest. Branches whipped against me, leaves crunching underfoot, but I kept going, putting as much distance as I could between me and the house. The only sound was my own heavy breathing, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I didn't slow down until I was deep into the woods, finally stopping to catch my breath, crouched down in the shadows, hidden by a cluster of trees. My mind raced, running through every possible scenario. They would come after me, that much was certain. They weren't bluffing about the hunt. These men were dangerous, and they'd made it clear they didn't care about anything but control and power. And worse, Sarah was with them. She had chosen them over me, betraying me without a second thought, turning my life into a nightmare. The anger and pain boiled up again, but I forced it down, focusing instead on survival. I didn't know what weapons they had, or how experienced they were in tracking, but I knew the land better than anyone. This forest had been my escape, my sanctuary, and now it was my best chance at survival. I needed to set traps, create diversions, anything to slow them down and keep them off my trail. I scouted the area, looking for potential spots to lay low and plan. My eyes adjusted to the dark as I spotted a narrow ravine up ahead, a perfect place to hide and maybe set up an ambush. I'd learned a thing or two in the military about survival, and if they thought they could break me with a little hunt, they had no idea who they were dealing with. I took a breath, listening to the sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. It was quiet for now, but I knew it wouldn't last. Soon, they'd be on my trail, and they wouldn't stop until they found me. I thought of Sarah's cold gaze, her complete lack of remorse. It was as if she'd wanted this, planned it even. The way she watched me suffer, her satisfaction in my pain. The betrayal was like a knife twisting in my gut, but I couldn't dwell on it now. I reminded myself of the promise I'd made in those final moments before escaping. If they wanted to play this game, they'd be playing by my rules. I crouched in the darkness, the cold night air pressing down around me, and every nerve in my body was on high alert. The silence of the forest felt heavy, ominous, as if it knew what was coming. My eyes scanned the trees around me, looking for anything that could help me turn the odds in my favor. They thought they could just hunt me down like some helpless prey, but they'd underestimated who they were dealing with. Taking a deep breath, I started moving again, keeping low, my steps careful and deliberate. My mind raced back to the survival training I'd had in the military. I'd trained for situations just like this, where my life depended on my ability to use my surroundings to outsmart the enemy. This time, though, the enemy wasn't some faceless stranger. It was a twisted group of men who had invaded my life, torn apart my marriage, and left me no choice but to fight back. I found a narrow path that led to a small clearing, the ground covered in leaves and fallen branches. Perfect. I started gathering sticks and rocks, using the natural debris to create a simple tripwire trap. I had no weapons, but I could make the environment my ally. If they came barreling down this path, one wrong step would set off the trap and buy me some valuable time. Once the trap was set, I moved further into the woods, looking for another hiding spot. The adrenaline kept me sharp, alert, and I could feel every instinct coming alive. I knew these woods well, every twist, every hill, every hidden corner. And while they thought they were chasing me, in reality, I was leading them into a maze of my making. Suddenly, I heard the faint crunch of footsteps in the distance. They were closer than I'd expected. I pressed myself against a tree, my breathing shallow as I listened. There was a low murmur of voices, 2, maybe 3 of them. They were speaking in hushed tones, but I could pick out words, phrases that sent a chill down my spine. They were planning how to split up, to cover more ground. One of them laughed, a dark, mocking sound that made my blood boil. As they approached, I caught a glimpse of them through the trees. They looked confident, cocky even, as if this was just a game to them. But they hadn't noticed the trap I'd set. I held my breath, watching as one of them stepped onto the wire. There was a sudden snap, and he tripped, stumbling forward as a cascade of rocks and branches came down on him, sending him sprawling to the ground. "Damn it!" he cursed, struggling to get up, and the others rushed to help him, their focus momentarily diverted. I used that split second to slip away, moving deeper into the shadows, putting more distance between us. My heart pounded, but I kept calm. One small victory, but I knew they wouldn't give up easily. As I moved further into the forest, the reality of my situation hit me again. This wasn't just survival. This was a personal battle, a fight for my dignity, my life, and for the betrayal that burned deep inside. Sarah's face flashed in my mind, her cold indifference as she stood by that man, letting him humiliate me. I couldn't shake the image, the raw anger and pain twisting together into something stronger, something that kept me moving even as exhaustion started to creep in. I found another spot, a small rocky outcrop that provided decent cover, and crouched down to catch my breath. I had to think ahead, to keep planning. They might be dangerous, but they were also overconfident, assuming I'd be an easy target. That was their weakness, and I was going to exploit it. After a few minutes, I heard the sound of branches breaking, heavy footsteps approaching again. They were getting closer, and this time, they were angry. I could hear them cursing, frustrated by the traps and by the fact that I was still eluding them. One of them shouted, "Come on, show yourself, coward. Make this easy on yourself." I smirked, knowing they were getting desperate. They weren't used to being challenged, weren't expecting someone to fight back. That was my advantage, and I was going to use it. I moved quietly along the edge of the outcrop, positioning myself so I could get a better view of them. If I played this right, I could lead them in circles all night. But just as I was about to slip further into the woods, I heard a voice that made me freeze. "Don't make it worse for yourself," the man said, his voice dripping with malice. "If you keep running, it'll only make us want to take our time when we catch you." It was him, the stranger who had humiliated me, the one who had claimed my wife like she was some kind of prize. The rage bubbled up again, my fists clenching involuntarily. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about making him pay for every second of torment he'd put me through. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to let rage cloud my judgment, not when so much was at stake. But I knew one thing. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to make sure he'd regret ever setting foot in my life. I moved silently, keeping low, planning my next move. The game had just begun, and I was done running. It was time to turn the tables. The forest seemed darker now, the trees closing in like silent witnesses to the hunt. I took deep breaths, focusing on every sound, every detail. My military instincts kicked in, sharper than ever. I wasn't the prey here, not anymore. I was the predator, and they were about to find out exactly what that meant. I knew the layout of the woods well enough to navigate even the trickiest trails. These guys, though, they were amateurs in this territory, relying on brute force and intimidation instead of real strategy. That was their weakness, and I was about to use it to its full advantage. As I slipped deeper into the shadows, I noticed a thick patch of brush up ahead, perfect for setting another trap. The branches here were heavy and twisted, ideal for a makeshift snare. I quickly gathered a few long, flexible branches and set up a basic trip mechanism, looping one end to the base of a tree. If they came barreling through here without thinking, one of them was going to get a rude surprise. Once I finished setting it, I moved to a new position behind a large oak tree, crouched low and watching the trail I'd left clear. The adrenaline was sharp, my senses on fire. Every rustle, every distant crack of a branch put me on edge, but I forced myself to stay still, to wait. Minutes later, I heard footsteps crashing through the underbrush. They were closer than I'd expected. These men were clearly getting impatient, the frustration in their voices evident. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught enough to know they were angry and careless. The first one emerged, his pace fast, not bothering to check his surroundings. Just as I'd planned. He hit the tripwire, and the snare whipped up, catching him around the ankle and yanking his leg up hard. He went down with a curse, his body crashing into the ground. I stifled a grin, satisfaction flooding through me as his shout of pain echoed through the trees. "Damn it, watch out!" Another voice called out, the leader's, no doubt. I heard him shove through the brush toward his fallen partner, clearly annoyed by the setback. "What are you, an idiot? Stay alert." I held my breath, watching as they scrambled to get their guy untangled from the snare. The leader was on high alert now, scanning the woods, his eyes narrowed and his hand resting on something at his side. Likely a weapon, judging by the way he was gripping it. He wasn't fooling around anymore. "All right, enough games," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "This isn't going to end well for you if you keep hiding, you hear me?" I didn't respond, of course. I just watched, staying hidden in the shadows, planning my next move. They were rattled now, but I knew this was just the beginning. I needed to keep them guessing, to keep them thinking I was everywhere and nowhere at once. As I observed, I caught sight of movement through the trees. My heart skipped a beat when I saw her, Sarah. She'd followed them, trailing a bit behind, her expression cold and detached as she watched them flounder. She didn't look worried, didn't even seem fazed by the danger surrounding her. It was as if she was just waiting, observing the chaos she'd helped create. That look on her face sent a surge of anger through me, but I forced myself to stay still. This was no time for distractions. As much as I wanted answers, I couldn't confront her now, not with these men circling around me. I had to keep my focus on them and handle her later. I slowly backed away, careful not to make a sound, moving toward another spot I knew well, a narrow path leading to a steep drop-off. If I could lead them there, they'd be at a serious disadvantage. The trail was treacherous, full of loose rocks and sharp turns. Anyone who wasn't paying attention could easily take a fall, and these guys were already showing just how careless they could be. I took a quick detour through some dense underbrush, leaving a few broken branches and footprints on purpose, enough to draw them toward the path. Then, I doubled back and climbed up onto a low ledge overlooking the trail, hiding myself behind a large tree trunk, my breath steady as I waited. Sure enough, it didn't take long for them to follow. The leader was at the front, his eyes scanning the ground, his frustration mounting with every step. Behind him, his remaining goons struggled to keep up, muttering curses under his breath. Sarah was a few paces back, watching the whole scene unfold with that same cold amusement. They moved down the narrow trail, their footing unsure on the loose rocks. Just as I'd hoped, the leader stumbled, cursing as his foot slipped, and he reached out to steady himself on a branch. I could see his patience fraying, the irritation plain on his face. I waited until they were right beneath me, then grabbed a handful of rocks from the ledge and tossed them down, letting them scatter across the trail. They tumbled noisily, echoing through the trees. The men froze, glancing up in surprise, their eyes scanning the ledge. "What the hell?" the leader muttered, his hand going to his side, reaching for a gun. I tensed, watching his every move, ready to drop back into cover if he spotted me. "Come out, coward!" he shouted, his voice ringing through the trees, bouncing off the rocks. "Stop hiding and face us like a man." I didn't move. I didn't need to. The game was in my control now, and they were playing by my rules. After a moment of silence, he gave an angry snarl, lowering his weapon slightly. He muttered something to his partner, and they continued down the path, moving slower, more cautious now. I waited until they were out of sight before slipping off the ledge and back into the trees, silent as a shadow. The hunt wasn't over yet, but I knew one thing for certain. They were losing ground, losing control, and I was just getting started. Moving through the trees, I felt a surge of energy. This was my turf now, and I was determined to turn every branch, every shadow, to my advantage. They thought they could corner me, intimidate me into submission, but they'd never dealt with someone who knew how to survive, how to fight with nothing but his wits and the surroundings. As I slipped deeper into the forest, I heard them muttering behind me, their voices growing fainter as they struggled to keep up with my trail. The satisfaction I felt was tempered only by the relentless anger that fueled me, a cold, burning anger aimed at the three men behind me, and at Sarah, who had set this whole twisted game in motion. I wanted to confront her, to look her in the eyes and demand answers, but I knew that time would come. For now, it was survival. I knew there was an old creek not far from here, a dry, rocky ravine that twisted and turned in unpredictable patterns. It was the perfect place to disorient them, to make them question every step. I sprinted toward it, careful to leave deliberate traces of my movement. Snapped twigs, faint boot prints in the mud, knowing they'd follow the trail I laid out for them. Once I reached the edge of the creek, I ducked down, hiding in a dense cluster of ferns and underbrush, waiting. Sure enough, minutes later, they arrived, stepping down into the ravine, their eyes scanning the ground, focused on the trail I'd left. They didn't see me watching from the cover, hidden just feet away, ready for the next phase of my plan. The leader was in front, his expression twisted with frustration, his patience frayed to the breaking point. Behind him was his last remaining goon, looking tired and disgruntled, his energy drained from the relentless chase. And there was Sarah, hanging back slightly, her face unreadable but her posture relaxed, almost casual, like this whole nightmare was just entertainment for her. I waited until they were deep in the creek, the walls of the ravine closing in around them. Then, without a sound, I doubled back, making my way around to the higher ground above them. I grabbed a thick branch from the ground, the weight of it solid in my hand, and positioned myself just above the trail where they'd have to pass. As they moved closer, I could hear the leader grumbling, his voice low and annoyed. "This guy thinks he's smarter than us. It's just a matter of time before he slips up." His arrogance was laughable, and I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction knowing he was about to get a harsh reality check. Just as they passed directly beneath me, I dropped the branch, aiming it to land right in their path. The sound of it crashing through the branches above startled them, sending them into a frenzy, their heads snapping upward, their hands flying to their weapons as they looked around, trying to figure out where I was. "Where are you?" the leader shouted, his voice echoing through the ravine. "Stop hiding, you coward." I didn't answer, letting the silence taunt them instead. Their frustration was palpable, and I could see the cracks starting to form in their confidence. They'd thought this would be an easy hunt, but now, with every turn, they were losing control, losing their sense of power. The goon at his side looked around, visibly shaken. "Man, let's just get out of here. This is messed up. I didn't sign up for some psycho hiding in the woods." The leader shot him a glare. "Shut up and keep moving. He's just one guy. We can handle this." Their argument was exactly what I needed. While they bickered, I moved quietly along the ridge, staying out of sight as I circled around to the other side of the ravine. Every minute I spent watching them struggle was a victory, a small taste of the justice I was determined to bring down on them. But I couldn't keep taunting them forever. At some point, I'd need to end this, to confront them head-on. And as I watched them stumble through the ravine, I knew the perfect way to turn this hunt into a trap they'd never see coming. I let them gain a bit of distance, then moved back along the edge of the forest toward an old abandoned cabin hidden deeper in the woods. It was a place I'd found years ago while exploring, a forgotten relic from some hunter's past, with a solid foundation and a vantage point overlooking a wide clearing. I could use it to my advantage, to lure them in and make them believe they had me cornered. Reaching the cabin, I quickly assessed its condition. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind, and the windows were broken, covered in dust and leaves. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay, the shadows deep and impenetrable. It was perfect. I positioned myself inside, just out of sight of the doorway, and waited, letting the stillness settle around me. It didn't take long before I heard their footsteps crunching through the underbrush outside. They'd seen the cabin, just as I'd planned, and I could hear their excited whispers as they assumed they'd finally cornered me. "Looks like he's in there," one of them said, his voice barely containing his glee. "This is it. No more games." I braced myself, gripping a heavy piece of wood I'd found inside the cabin, and listened as they approached, their footsteps growing louder. I could practically feel their confidence radiating, their eagerness to end this chase. They had no idea that, for the first time in this entire twisted game, they were the ones walking into a trap. As they reached the door, I tightened my grip, every muscle tensed, waiting for the exact right moment. I stood silently inside the abandoned cabin, my heart pounding as the footsteps grew closer. Shadows fell across the doorway, and I tightened my grip on the heavy piece of wood in my hand, feeling its solid weight as I waited for the perfect moment to strike. They thought they'd finally cornered me, that I was defenseless, but they had no idea what awaited them on the other side of that door. The first one stepped in, his silhouette framed in the doorway, scanning the room. His back was turned to me, giving me the advantage I'd been waiting for. Without a second's hesitation, I swung, the wood connecting with a sickening crack against the side of his head. He crumpled to the floor instantly, the shock of the hit rendering him motionless. One down. The noise must have alerted the others because, in the next second, the leader and his remaining goon burst through the door, guns drawn, their eyes wild as they searched for me. I darted back into the shadows, keeping out of sight, using the dim lighting and my knowledge of the cabin's layout to stay hidden. My heart raced as I planned my next move, adrenaline sharpening my focus. "Where are you, you coward?" the leader hissed, his voice echoing through the cramped space. His gaze was intense, scanning the dark corners of the room. "Come out and face me." I could see the tension in his posture, the frustration mounting with every second he couldn't find me. The goon beside him glanced nervously around, clearly on edge after seeing his partner go down so easily. He muttered something under his breath, his hand shaking as he tightened his grip on his gun. Good. Let them feel the fear. I waited until the leader took a step forward, then slipped out from behind a pile of debris near the window, staying low as I circled around. I was close enough to hear his breathing, to see the sweat beading on his forehead. He was tough, I'd give him that, but this wasn't his game anymore. I moved quickly, grabbing a loose plank from the floor and bringing it down hard across the goon's arm, knocking the gun from his hand. He yelped in pain, clutching his arm as he stumbled back, shock and confusion on his face. Before he could recover, I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall, pinning him there, my face inches from his. Not so fun when you're the one being hunted, is it? I growled, my voice low, filled with the rage and frustration I'd been bottling up since this nightmare began. The goon's eyes widened, fear flashing across his face as he struggled to break free. I held him there, my grip tight, daring him to fight back. But he was too scared, too overwhelmed by the sudden shift in power. With one final shove, I let him go, watching as he stumbled back, cradling his injured arm, his confidence completely shattered. The leader, meanwhile, had finally spotted me. He raised his gun, aiming it straight at my chest, his face twisted with fury. "Enough of this," he spat, his finger on the trigger. "You're done. I'm ending this right now." I froze, calculating my next move. His finger tightened, and I could see he was seconds away from pulling the trigger. But then, in an instant, a sound from outside caught his attention. His gaze flicked toward the door, his focus breaking just long enough for me to act. I lunged forward, knocking the gun from his hand, sending it skidding across the floor. We grappled, our bodies colliding with the force of two men who knew this was a fight for survival. He was strong, his movements fast and precise, but I had something he didn't, a fury born of betrayal, a determination to end this once and for all. Our struggle took us across the room, crashing into furniture, knocking over anything in our path. I could feel the impact of every punch, every shove, but I pushed through, using every ounce of strength I had. He managed to land a hit to my jaw, sending pain radiating through my skull, but I didn't let it stop me. I came back at him, slamming my fist into his ribs, feeling the satisfying crack as he gasped, doubling over in pain. He stumbled back, clutching his side, his face twisted with agony. "You think you've won?" he snarled, trying to catch his breath. "You're nothing. She chose me because you're weak." The words hit like a slap, reigniting the anger I'd fought to keep in check. But instead of letting it control me, I channeled it, focusing it into a final burst of strength. "No," I said, my voice steady, a deadly calm settling over me. "She chose you because she's just as twisted as you are. But you'll both regret underestimating me." Before he could respond, I stepped forward, delivering a swift, brutal punch that sent him crashing to the ground. He lay there, dazed, his body barely moving as he tried to process what had just happened. I took a step back, breathing heavily, the weight of everything settling over me as I looked down at him, knowing this fight was over. But then I heard a soft, slow clapping from the doorway. I turned to see Sarah standing there, her expression unreadable, her hands coming together in a slow, mocking applause. She looked at me, her gaze piercing, as if appraising my every move, every decision that had led us here. "Well done," she said, her voice cold and detached, a twisted smile playing on her lips. "I didn't think you had it in you." Her words stung, but I held her gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to let her have the satisfaction of seeing any weakness. "This is over, Sarah," I said, my voice firm. "Whatever game you're playing, it ends here." She tilted her head, amusement glinting in her eyes. "You think this is over?" She shook her head, her smile widening. "Oh, darling, this is just the beginning." Sarah's words echoed in the small, dim room, laced with a chilling confidence that sent a shiver down my spine. This was the woman I had once loved, trusted, shared my life with. But now, looking into her cold, mocking eyes, I realized she was a stranger, someone capable of orchestrating this twisted nightmare, watching with sadistic satisfaction as I fought for my life. "Oh, darling, this is just the beginning," she repeated, her voice low and dripping with malice. I clenched my fists, feeling the bruises from the fight, my body aching from the struggle. I was exhausted, every muscle on edge, but her words reignited something fierce inside me. She thought she could break me, that this was her game to control. But she was about to find out just how wrong she was. "What's your plan here, Sarah?" I asked, my voice steady, masking the anger boiling inside. "You've turned my life into a sick game. But to what end? Why?" She chuckled softly, shaking her head like she was dealing with a child who couldn't understand. "You always were so predictable," she said, her voice a mixture of pity and disdain. "I was bored, suffocating in a life you forced me into. I wanted excitement, something real, and you were just too weak to give me that." I took a slow, deep breath, forcing myself to hold her gaze, refusing to let her see any sign of weakness. "So, you bring in these goons, orchestrate a twisted hunt in our own home, for excitement?" I shook my head, disgusted. "That's sick, Sarah, and it's not going to